Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to take part in this international meditation conference and to offer something from our program at Emory University. Uh, I want to focus today on what we call the theory of change in CBCT. There's a really, as you all know, some advances in the neuroscience and the understanding of the brain and which aspects of our neural anatomy are involved in different parts of meditation. And so I want to focus on a particular model for understanding the regulation of emotions. It comes from a neuroscience paper from 2 years ago, and explain how that relates to the different meditation practices in CBCT. And then at the end, we will have an opportunity for a sample meditation. So, advance my slides here. There we go. So our center at Emory, we're in Atlanta. Most people know us internationally as Atlanta. We're in the state of Georgia. Yet this is where the Olympics were in 1996. And Emory University has been there for almost 200 years now. And we are proud to have established the Center for Contemplative Science and Compassion-Based Ethics at Emory. For short, we just call it the Compassion Center, much easier, right? So we have a very simple vision, a compassionate and ethical world for all. And our mission, being at a university, is to promote human well-being or flourishing by developing education programs, facilitating dialogue, and engaging in research. Excuse me, I'm adjusting my screen a little. Okay. So we have a number of programs. I will not go into these in depth. The one I'm going to talk about today is CBCT. I want you to know about a program briefly called C-Learning, Social, Emotional, and Ethical Learning. It's a little bit like CBCT for children, but it's not so much focused on meditation, but it's focused on the same types of skills that we can learn to regulate emotions and cultivate a compassionate heart. And it works with children, and it's endorsed by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who supports this program, asked us to develop it about 6 years ago, and now it's been translated into 12 languages and distributed across the world. I think we're in 25 countries now, so very excited to be part of a center that's providing similar types of trainings for children that we see as so helpful for adults. We have a program called Emory Tibet Science Initiative that's bringing Western science, or I think I should probably say contemporary science, is a better phrase for it, into the monastic world where the Tibetan Buddhist monks are studying. The Dalai Lama is very excited about that one. Of course, we teach courses in higher education and we do research. So enough of all of that. Let's talk about the centerpiece of this program, Compassion Training Program, which is compassion itself. Understanding compassion. Just take a moment, if you would, to consider for yourself what you think of when you hear that word compassion. What do you feel? How do you relate to that experience of feeling compassion in your life? When have you seen it in your life? It's a complex emotion. There's a lot written about it. And actually, the science of compassion is fairly new. I'd say it's about 20, 25 years old. Before that, there were really no scientists studying this thing we call compassion. So the definition of compassion is also new and somewhat developing. But it's worth me explaining what we mean by compassion in CBCT. A warm-hearted concern that unfolds when we witness the suffering of others and feel motivated to relieve it or alleviate that. So there are 3 parts of this. A lot of people, when they hear the word compassion, they think of empathy. Well, empathy is definitely part of compassion. It's not the whole thing, but understanding how someone else is feeling, that's this middle part here when we witness the suffering of others. Seeing that they're struggling is part of it. Of course, being motivated to do something, to act, to relieve their suffering, that is a huge part of compassion. But we emphasize here in CBCT that for these things to be authentic, understanding another's perspective, wanting to see them free from their struggles, the authenticity of that comes from this warm-hearted connection or concern that we have. What by warm-hearted we mean, other words for that would be feeling like we belong together, that we have a connection with the other. And here on the side, I can just call out these three aspects that are in this definition from the cognitive science perspective. The affective part of the emotion of compassion, feeling warm-heartedness or closeness. The cognitive part, that's this awareness or understanding of the other's suffering. And the motivational part, which is that wish or desire, that urge to do something. You know, when that's authentic, that's what we're talking about with compassion. Does not mean we can always fix or solve the problems of others, right? I mean, many times we cannot, but that urge to do so, that is compassion. When we see a way, we will, of course, act and do a compassionate or kind action. So that's what we mean by compassion. So maybe I should back up just a moment. Oops. It's the wrong way. Let me just say that, it's pretty clear in the science that all of us, all mammals really, and birds as well, experience this compassion, this understanding of what the other needs, the motivation to provide that, and this genuine sense of closeness or connection. If we didn't have these feelings, we as mammals would never be taken care of by our parents. We would never thrive and succeed in the world. So we all have compassion as a capability. Maybe the same way you could think of, we all have the capability to speak a language. Now, it doesn't mean we're going to learn to speak the language, but we have the capability. Our society helps us learn that language or learn to speak, right? So it's the same with compassion. We're born with the capacity for it, and our social conditions at first, and then later as we become adults, we can be self-directed. We can cultivate compassion ourselves. So you may be thinking, if compassion is so natural, why do we need a program to train in compassion? Well, though it's natural, just like the language is natural, it helps to have a class in it. It helps to understand the various parts of language. In the same way, it helps to understand the various parts of compassion. And that's really what CBCT is. It breaks compassion down into these 8 components and provides practices to cultivate each one of them. And then all together, they result in greater compassion. At least that is the goal. The Dalai Lama, who is, of course, an inspiration for us, he has visited Emory on many occasions, and one of his monasteries at Drepung Losling in India is where the executive director of our program at Emory trained as a monk for 25 years. So he says this: the ultimate source of a happy life is warm-heartedness. Even animals display some sense of compassion. When it comes to human beings, compassion can be combined with our intelligence. And the Dalai Lama often taps his head here, our intelligence. Through the application of reason, compassion can be extended to all 7 billion human beings. So note the coming together here of the heart and the head, or the emotions and the rational mind, the reason. This approach is not saying we just need to feel compassion and throw out all the thinking, nor is it saying we should just do lots of thinking and throw out all of our feelings. It's saying we need to bring the best of both worlds that we have as human beings, compassion and reason. Together, these things can, through our intelligence, through practice, through study, we can extend our compassion to include all 7 billion human beings. So that's one way we train compassion, is to extend it to be more inclusive, to be less blind or biased in our compassion. So again, I mentioned that Dr. Negi, the executive director of our center, was a former monk. He developed CBCT about 20 years ago. And he drew from what's called a Lojong, or mind training tradition of Indo-Tibetan Buddhism, which is a very systematic approach to cultivating compassion, and not just compassion that's deeper, more deeply felt and more natural and spontaneous, but also a compassion that's more inclusive. So these are the two ways we think of training compassion: more spontaneous, deeper, natural, and then more inclusive, unbiased. But of course, he's taken it, and to me, this is the thing I really value about CBCT, and so many others who've tried it also value, is that Dr. Negi has done such a good job of taking out the psychological components from Lojong and setting aside the Buddhist belief system, the Buddhist cultural system that he grew up in. He's still very much devoted to that. He's the spiritual director at the local monastery in Atlanta. But he understands that for most people, Buddhism is not their primary faith tradition. And for many people, they have no faith tradition. And yet we all have compassion. We all value compassion. As the Dalai Lama said, this warm-heartedness is the key to anyone's happy life, whether they're Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, atheist, Jewish, Hindu, you name it. So CBCT, completely secular. And we have people doing it from every religion that you can think of, and they find value in it. So I'm not going to go through this whole chart, okay? This is, don't panic. This is not, this is shown to just give you a sense of the 8 modules of CBCT. And mainly, I'd like to focus here on the right, this well-being. Here, you see that you would think compassion would be the primary outcome of CBCT, and in many ways it is, but really it's well-being, it's human flourishing. And that's because there's this insight that compassion is part of our well-being. It's a major contributor to what makes for a happy life. But along with that is up here, you see this other outcome of CBCT practices and input for well-being, which is resilience, emotional resilience, our capacity to bounce back, to regulate our emotions and not be overwhelmed by them, but rather direct them for a meaningful, purposeful life. So resilience and compassion are the primary 2 outcomes of the CBCT practices. If you go here, the gray ovals are the 8 modules of CBCT. There are 2 on self-compassion here, 4 and 5. And then these are the outcomes of each one. That this is in a paper that we wrote to help researchers identify states, mental states they could study for CBCT. I'll just show this very briefly, but CBCT is one of the oldest compassion training programs and the most researched. And there's a lot of promising outcomes: decreased depression, loneliness, stress biomarkers, increased compassion, empathy, hopefulness, and research in many different populations, different countries. CBCT is translated into 3 different languages, and maybe Korea will be next. That would be nice. But so you can check this is all on our website. If you're a scientist and you want to know more, you can look into that. But what I really want to get to now is the primary topic of this presentation for your consideration, that in this paper from 2020 by Moody and Gross, neuroscientists, they proposed 3 different cognitive strategies for regulating emotions. And they did this from years of study and they've discovered 3 different parts of the brain or sets of circuits within the brain that are brought online to regulate emotions in 3 different ways. And they feel that they've identified what these ways are. And they call them attention deployment, self-distancing, and reappraisal. And what's really fascinating about this discovery is that these 3 techniques, if you will, or strategies for regulating emotion are very similar to meditation techniques. In particular in CBCT, and that's what I want to explain to you today. It's like how CBCT combines all 3 of these, but treats them individually and then brings them together to cultivate compassion. And I think since you're here at the meditation conference, I think you'll recognize your types of meditation that you've studied in these strategies. So I hope that gives you some insight for your own practice. Why cognition? Sometimes we think about cognitive world is like thinking, and the emotional world is like feeling. And these are 2 different things, and they're completely unrelated. But what's very, very clear, and it gets clearer all the time in neuroscience, is that there is not a real distinction between cognition and emotion. These 2 things are feeding back and forth with each other all the time. And it's really actually hard to draw a line between the experience of awareness, of cognitive awareness, and the experience of feeling emotion. It's impossible to separate them. So Joseph Ledoux, one of the original thinkers in this field, wrote The Emotional Brain in 1996, said this: "One of the reasons cognition is so useful, a part of the mental arsenal, is that it allows this shift from reaction to action. The survival advantages that come from being able to make this shift may have been an important ingredient that shaped the evolutionary elaboration of cognition in mammals and the explosion of cognition in primates." So we're a primate, we have big brains, and we do a lot of cognitive processing that we don't find in the lower order primates and other animals. And Ledoux's insight is this isn't just to create tools or to invent, the internet and invent Zoom and this way of invent things, but it's actually originally, these cognitive processes were about regulating emotion. And let's dive into that now. So the first type of emotion regulation, hopefully this will start to make sense. The first strategy for emotion regulation, attention deployment. And this is a quote here from the Craig Moody, James Gross article. As an attention deployment, distraction involves directing attention toward the non-emotional aspects of a situation, the non-emotional aspects. Okay, away from the emotion eliciting situation altogether, or changing the object of one's internal locus. So this is a type, I'll go ahead and say it because I think many of us here probably are familiar with types of meditation that do exactly this. If you have ever meditated on feelings of your breath in the nostril or in the belly, or the rise and fall of the belly, feelings in the body of any sort, or sound. If you've ever meditated with a phrase like a mantra that you repeat over and over again. So you're placing your attention on that sound, whether it's an external or internal sound, or these feelings in the present moment. That placing the attention there is keeping the attention off of these distractions, what we call distraction in meditation. Often those distractions come with emotions, difficult emotions, distracting emotions. So there's a calming effect that is at least one of the aspects or one of the results of attention deployment meditation. And what we find is in CBCT, that type of meditation shows up in modules 1 and 2 of the 8 modules. It's early in the program. And here you see it in module 1, connecting to a moment of nurturance, which hopefully we will practice here together in 10 or 15 minutes. And in module 2, which is actually called Developing Stable and Clear Attention, and the outcome is attentional control. So it's this ability, I'm sure you've heard this talked about like a muscle that you build, this ability to notice distraction, disengage, and redeploy that attention back to your chosen object of focus. This has a very calming effect and regulates emotion in a very direct way. Of course, as soon as the attention goes back to something that's disturbing, distressing, or causes anxiety, then the emotion comes back. So this has its purpose. It's very helpful, but it is only one of the many ways, or let's say in Moody and Gross's world, one of 3 ways to regulate emotion. The second one, self-distancing. What does that mean? In CBCT, it's related to module 3, which I'll talk about in a moment. But this is another quote from their paper. On the continuum of cognitive regulation strategies, self-distancing is thought to lie between cognitive change and attentional deployment. Those are the other 2. Cognitive change here they're referring to reappraisal, which we'll talk about in a moment. So it's between these other 2 strategies. The mechanism of self-distancing operates by individuals separating themselves from the reality of the situation by taking the perspective of a detached and objective observer, such as a doctor treating a patient or a film director observing a scene. So often this type of practice, which is in meditation, is called goes by many names. Equanimity practice. It can be called open monitoring. It can be called resting the mind in a natural state. If I could just try to describe it for a moment for those who have not tried this type of practice, it's really just a practice of instead of focusing attention on one thing, like one thought or one feeling, sensation, or one sound, there's a letting go of that intense focus, letting go, and then an accepting whatever arises into the field of attention at that moment. So there's no choice in this practice. We're backing up, we're doing this, as it calls here, self-distancing. We're distancing ourselves from these things that are often so captivating and engaging and sometimes entangling. And if you're someone who's ever lost sleep because of the mind just thinking about the same thing over and over, like I have, ruminating, if you experience anxious thinking, repetitive thinking, this can be a very helpful practice to learn to just see those things come and go and not get entangled in them. So that's self-distancing practice. And check. That is module 3 in CBCT. And the outcomes there are meta-awareness and de-reification. That's a fancy term that's just referring to our ability to have a thought and recognize that our thought is not the same thing as reality. So, right, I can think of something, but just because I think it doesn't mean it's real. So then this is a very valuable skill that we can have, but I will, for the sake of time, I'm going to keep moving. The final thing, reappraisal. In CBCT, this is modules 4 through 8. And I think in some ways, this distinguishes CBCT from many other meditation programs out there, because this is a real central focus on CBCT. It's in CBCT. It's not done first. The other practices, attention deployment, self-distancing, are skills that are necessary to do the reappraisal with some competence. But still, the reappraisal is seen as a very valuable skill for emotion regulation in CBCT and here within the Moody and Gross neuroscience article as well. And it involves different parts of the brain. So we can train all of these. That's the good news. Cognitive reappraisal, I'm reading the quote, is a type of cognitive change that involves modifying the meaning of the situation in order to alter the emotion that we're experiencing. So emotions follow events, or they actually follow our interpretation of events. And if we can shift our interpretation of the event, we can shift our emotion. Reappraisal often is used to reduce emotion and consequently is associated with decreases in self-reported negative affect ratings and activity in emotion-generative brain regions such as the amygdala. So that's from the neuroscience paper, but it's surprisingly in alignment with many of these later modules of CBCT. Self-compassion here, and then expanding our circle of concern, gratitude, and tenderness, and harnessing the power of compassion, all have this, are focused on this capacity to reappraise, to shift the way we're interpreting the experience we're having that might be disturbing. It might be getting in the way of compassion we feel for ourselves. It might be getting in the way of the compassion we could feel for others. But by taking the bigger picture, broadening our lens, seeing things more completely from multiple perspectives, we access that compassion for self and others. So if I have time, I'll give an example of that. I think I do have time. Let me pause there to give an example, because I feel like this might be something that is different than a lot of the meditation that you've done or that many people have done. So an example of reappraisal would be, that's helpful, would be like if you didn't get something you wanted, say you were trying to get a new job, and then you were competing against 10 other people, and you thought you might get it, you think you'd be a good person for it, but then at the end you get the email that says, we're sorry, we're not taking you for this job. Or maybe it's applying for a grant, and you think I've got a great project, I work really hard, I present this, and then I get denied, I don't get the grant. So I don't get something I want. Obviously the emotion is going to be very troubling. It's very frustrating. It doesn't feel good to lose or be rejected. So this is how reappraisal can be a cognitive strategy for regulating emotion. So we're feeling this emotion, I'm upset, I'm angry, maybe I'm getting depressed or anxious. And then it occurs to me, well, I did my best trying to get that job or that grant. And really, when I think about it, there are so many causes and factors that influence the way this turns out. It's not really about me. It's not all in my control. And it really never was. I can do my best, and still, for so many reasons, maybe the judges of the competition or the people hiring have different criteria that I don't even know about. Or maybe other people have different skills that are more suited for that job. There's so many factors that go into any outcome that I can realize by thinking about it, thinking and reappraising, taking the bigger picture, that it's really not all about me. It's not that this doesn't mean I'm a bad person or that I would be a bad person for this job. I still might be a good person for the job. I just did not succeed in this one case. What happens to your feelings about that situation when you take that broader perspective. It's immediately not so bad, right? It still hurts, it still isn't pleasant, but it's not debilitating. It doesn't knock us down to a level where we become unable to act or so narrowly focused on this one thing that we don't see opportunity. Often in our failures, there's opportunity to learn, to ask questions. What could I have done better? And what can I do better next time? So that's just one example of how reappraisal of the initial event, this initial appraisal that causes that harsh, difficult emotion, can be shifted. And right now I'm giving an example of what you might do to cultivate more self-compassion, just as one example, right? So, at the beginning of that, you don't get the job and you think, oh, I'm such a loser, I'm a bad person. You're not very nice to yourself, right? This talk inside. But then you think about it, you see the bigger picture, all of a sudden, well, I did my best and I'm not 100% in control. So maybe there's an opportunity here for growth. So that's the kind of reappraisal you can practice and get better at, and make that more part of your disposition. And this is really the power of the CBCT approach, is that with the clear and stable attention up here and the early modules and the enhanced self-awareness, we began to shift our automatic appraisals or thinking about things so that when those events happen later, it's much easier to take that bigger picture and bounce back, to have this resilience that we're talking about, and also compassion. I'll say briefly that there's a lovely kind of poem by Vasubandhu, an Indian Buddhist philosopher from the 5th century. So this is 1,500 years ago. And it said this: when one has not cleared away the dispositions for afflictive emotions, and the triggers for these emotions are in proximity, if one engages these triggers with false projections, the mind projects onto them things that aren't there, then the causes of the afflictive emotions are complete. This is a core text for the Lojong trainings that led to CBCT. And Dr. Negi was just amazed when this neuroscience paper aligned with this four verses so well. This one, triggers are in proximity, is about attention deployment. If the trigger is there, if I can get away from it, then the emotion won't be there. That's this distraction and redeployment of attention. Self-distancing. If one engages these triggers with false projections, the mind is kind of stirring the pot and ruminating and putting all this stuff on things. If we can back up and get a little clearer picture, then we can do the reappraisal part, which helps us, again, clear away our dispositions. These mindsets we have, like, I need to control every outcome, or some people are good people and other people are completely bad people. This kind of black and white thinking. There are many examples. Or I'm alone and I have to do everything for myself in the world, as opposed to saying, well, actually, I have so many people I share the planet with, and we're interconnected and interdependent. These mindsets are these dispositions that are being talked about here in the first line. If you haven't cleared away these dispositions, then even if you're doing your best with attention, stable attention, and self-distancing, when things get rough, those are going to come back. Those appraisals are going to come back. And then you're not going to have the emotion regulation you need for your own resilience and for your sustained compassion for others. So that's a little touch of the ancient philosophy here. So, all right, we're doing okay with the time. I'm going to shift now and lead in a little practice a little meditation practice. Actually, I see there are 9 chats, and thankfully, I suppose they're all in Korean. So I'll assume those aren't for me, because I can't read them, I can't understand them. So my apologies. What we're going to do is just a brief meditation that is part of this crucial starting point for CBCT. We call it Module 1, or the foundational module, connecting to a moment of nurturance. And you see, this actually feeds both into our resilience and down here through this line, our compassion. So it's very important. It's very simple as a practice, but there's a lot that we can learn from it and build from it. So I'm going to, without telling you much more about it, let's just do a little reflection. And if you've been taking lots of notes or drinking your tea or multitasking, doing your email while you listen, then I would invite you now for about 10 minutes to simply put all that aside. And if you're comfortable closing your eyes, you can do that, or just casting your eyes down in front of you. Or if actually the first part, if you're writing, you may want to have a pen and paper, because I'm going to give you something to write about at first. And if you don't have that, that's fine. You can just think about it. That's fine too. And then we'll have time for some questions and answers at the end. Okay. So the first step is to list a few moments when you have felt especially safe, seen, or valued. When you think about the life you've lived, it could be from this week, getting ready for this conference. It could be from long ago, when you were a child. It could be from school days, when you had a teacher who took a special interest to take care of you and teach you something. A mentor, a parent, a grandparent, friend. Just see if you can think of at least 3 different moments you can remember across your life where you felt especially safe, seen, or valued. I'm just going to be quiet for about 30 seconds while you think about that. While you keep thinking about it, I want to point out this could be, it doesn't have to be with another person. It could be in nature, a beautiful place you've been in nature, or a beautiful room you've been in. If you have a strong faith tradition, this could be in a moment of prayer, that you remember a specific time that you felt a connection to a divine presence. This is your time. It's your reflection. So you make this meaningful for you. The key is these are times you felt safe, protected, comforted, valued. And now I would like to ask you to just pick one. Just one of those. And it doesn't need to be the best one. You may not even be able to think of a good one. You might be thinking, I can't really remember anything like that in my life. I don't know. Well, let me tell you that for a lot of people at first, this can be difficult. It can be hard to remember. So you're not alone. It's our recommendation is just, don't get upset with yourself or think there's something wrong. That is not the case. Just in some ways, you may be expecting too much. Just think of a small thing. A friend dropped you off a little gift when you were feeling down. A friend called you or emailed you. Someone smiled at you. A stranger opened the door for you when you were carrying boxes and you could not get through a door. Something like that. Just pick one, anything's fine, and write or just think about all the details of that experience. What do you remember about that experience? So build an image in your head of it. What colors do you remember? What sounds were there? Do you remember what you were wearing or what other people were wearing? Can you see their face in your mind's eye? Their hair? Are there smells? Smells or things you can hear? What's the weather like? So again, I'll be quiet for a little bit while you just keep going. Challenge yourself to think of more and more details and that make this a very real, vivid memory, even if it's small. So you may notice that this begins sometimes to shift the way you feel right now. Sometimes a smile comes to our face or a sense of warmth in the chest, or sometimes even moisture in the eyes, like tears of joy, perhaps, thinking about something if it was a very special experience. But whatever it was for you, how did this moment impact your relationships or other aspects of your life? How important was this moment to you? Did it change your own personal sense of trust or joy, give you confidence, motivation? Why do you remember this right now? And as you're thinking about that, you can also think about, what if life never had such moments at all? How important is it for our world in general that we have access to feelings of safety and nurturance? So let's take a moment now just to put everything down as you were writing. And go ahead and cast your eyes down, get comfortable. We're going to go into this moment a little bit deeper and see what happens. Just experiment with this. Taking a few deeper breaths as we settle into this reflective practice. By elongating the breath, we can fill the whole lungs, the entire lung and torso area, with oxygen, allowing that sense that the oxygen is filling, expanding, and spreading throughout the entire body and mind, a sense of awakening, enlivening. As we breathe in, and as we breathe out, we can release that stale air, letting it go, letting it just dissolve away. Staleness just melts away. Just take one more of these deep breaths. Using this opportunity to tune into the body. Can we make shifts or adjustments that allow us to become more comfortable? Release tensions in the neck and shoulders, perhaps. Release tension around the jaw, the eyes, the forehead. And just check in. How are we feeling right now? How's the body feeling? And with this awareness, let the breath return to its own rhythm and bring to mind that moment of nurturance you identified earlier. A moment where you felt especially safe or valued, comforted. And just put yourself in your mind's eye, put yourself there as fully as you can, recalling the details, the colors, the persons who were there, if there were people. Can you place yourself there in a three-dimensional way? Feel what was to your left and your right, what was behind you. What was touching your skin? What did the clothing feel like? Was there a person there to hug or hold your hand? Was there a person who had a smiling face or smiling eyes? Can you give yourself permission to just connect fully with feelings of comfort, safety, warmth, if they arise? Sometimes they don't come. That's okay. But if you notice them, you can just notice where they live in the body. The chest, the throat, belly, the head, arms, legs. Where do you feel these feelings of nurturance, safety, comfort? And just rest there for another 30 seconds. Check back in with the body now. How does it feel? What do you notice? Have there been any shifts? How about your emotions or your insights, your thinking? Any new thoughts come? This is an experiment. It's exploring. So if you did feel that sense of nurturance and care, I would ask you also to think about what it would be like to know that you are helping others to have such feelings. What is it like when you can contribute to the well-being of others, that they feel this sense of nurturance, safety, soothing, comfort, either through your words, your actions? It could even be at a systems level that you're working to create policies or products that bring people more likely to experience such sense of safety and nurturance, and how important it is in our world that we do have these moments, each one of us, that allow us to grow and become our best self. And finally, if there's anything from this brief practice that you appreciated or enjoyed or learned from, just name that to yourself and set the intention to carry that insight with you into your world, into the rest of your day, into the rest of your week. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your informative presentation, and I especially enjoyed how you led the reflective meditation practice. Just watching your face and listening to your voice has some kind of soothing effects on myself. Thank you. 네, 주의력 안정 및 정서적 인식 향상에 대한 훈련과 자신 및 타인과의 관계를 더 잘 이해하기 위한 분석적 성찰이 포함된 티모시 해리슨 국장님의 CBCT 명상 프로그램에 관한 강의 잘 들었습니다. 이제 Q&A 세션으로 들어갈 텐데요. 우선 첫 번째 질문 먼저 하도록 하겠습니다. CBCT 프로그램은 달라이 라마의 세속주의와 그 뜻을 같이 함을 볼 수 있는데 그 이유는 무엇일까요? 라는 질문이었습니다. Did you see the question on your chatting?
Yes, that's a great question. And you're right. The Dalai Lama speaks very often about secular ethics, he calls it. And he feels that it's so important for the world today to develop a way to have an ethical discussion, ethical dialogue between people across cultures, across countries, so that we have a common way of working together to make the world a place we can survive in, that we'll survive in. It's a dangerous time as human beings are so interconnected. The whole globe is connected. And when he speaks of secular ethics, he says that secular ethics rests on two pillars, two columns. And one of these columns is common humanity, that we must see that we are like each other as well as different. Of course, the differences are obvious. We speak different languages. We have different skin tones and hair and cultures and religions. But along with those differences, we are all the same in that we want a meaningful life. We want to avoid pain and loss. And we also, the other pillar he speaks of is interdependence. Seeing clearly that none of us exist by ourselves. None of our cultures exist by ourselves. We all, every one of us in every group is in some ways dependent on others. Not just for simple things like our food and water and our technology, but also we see in the environment. We cannot pollute in our country without impacting other countries with our pollution, right? So this interdependence and common humanity, if we can see those two things and understand them clearly, he says, the Dalai Lama says that is the basis for secular ethics. And then CBCT Module 6 is all about common humanity, seeing practicing our capacity to see the humanity of the other, to see that for all of our differences, to see that they, like us, want a meaningful life. And they, like us, are vulnerable. They have vulnerabilities. They have emotional habits and patterns, just like I do, that cause them to struggle. So in that way, we're all the same. And Module 7 is about interdependence. And it's called Gratitude and Affection, but it's really focused on expanding our sense of gratitude. So we're not limiting our gratitude only for one or two people or for the people who are benefiting us in the most obvious ways, but we are practicing our ability to realize that there are hundreds and thousands of people who actually benefit us through their actions every day, through our food, our electricity, our internet, all the books that we read that were written years ago. So many people have contributed to our lives. And that's the simple things. What about your education? How many people contributed to that, to you having the skills that you have to enjoy life, enjoy a hobby, or have your job. So that interdependence, if we don't keep that in mind, anyway, the more we have that interdependence, the more easily our gratitude just naturally flows out. And when we feel gratitude toward others, it makes sense to just help them back. If they've helped us, we help them back. Reciprocity. So that's that is why that's my answer about that. I think that I'll just conclude that by emphasizing that CBCT is trying to create a program that works for people of all faiths and cultures, and even people of no faith. And it seems to be working. We have many people trying it. So